So we've done at least one other of these. So this is not a new thing, but this is our that would never work in therapy segment. Because
Ooh.
there
Ooh.
are a couple of these moments, in TV, television, film, whatever,
Mhm.
that I'm just kind of interested in. And we had, I think, in the previous one we recorded, teased talking about The Sopranos. But what I realized is there were a couple of things in The Sopranos that
Mm.
might be worth talking about. Do you have a hunch about which one I'm going to ask you, Dan?
I, 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 I don't, but like, I will admit that this segment always starts getting me a little bit riled up because there's so much bad
Yeah.
portrayal of psychologists and psychotherapists in
Mhm.
TV and movies that I just like. I mean, because it's either the psychologist is more has more mental health problems than their client does, or it's just portrayal of psychotherapy in a way that is just wildly inaccurate. So I every time I see there's a therapist in a movie, I always get like I walk into the room tense and ready, like for some, you know. So you go ahead, and I did watch the entirety of The Sopranos 20 years ago. I don't know, whenever it went off the air. So we're relying on my memory and Gail's as well.
Well, for
Well,
you and anybody who's less familiar, I'll give a little background. So, if first of all, if you've never seen The Sopranos, it's about a mob boss, Tony Soprano, and I wouldn't say that therapy is a side plot. Like it's a big piece of
Yeah,
it, really.
it's featured quite a bit.
Um, and he enters treatment for panic attacks. Ultimately, is really what he goes in for. And Dr. Jennifer Melfi is his therapist. And he sees her a bunch, and she's really one of the people he can be honest and confide in and receive objective feedback, even though she does express moments where she's not sure how much she can push back against him, which is fair.
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 Um,
Mm-hmm.
anyway, there is a moment though where she stops treatment, and that's what I was going to ask you about. She's like, I can't see you anymore. This has happened. I don't feel like I can be objective, and I am ending treatment with you. And I'm just wondering, like, obviously, treatment comes to an end at times, and it's run its course. And I'm just kind of wondering, like, would this be ethical to leave somebody in this scenario where he's still dealing with panic attacks and clearly benefiting from therapy? Um, but Dr. Melfi feels too conflicted to continue.
I've done this.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. There's a way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't recall the particulars in the show, but my suspicion is it fell on the side of not quite ethical, but
Probably not.
there's a pathway. Dan, talk about the pathway. How do we do this?
Yeah, I mean, if I feel as a therapist, my job is to be present for my client. And if I feel like I can't, we call maintain therapeutic distance, meaning that I keep it about my client, not about me. If I find that my own personal stuff is going to interfere, I'm first like I'm required to get help to deal with that on my own. But if my stuff gets in the way, I have to say to the person, I can't work with you because I have a conflict. I wouldn't disclose what the conflict is unless it was evident in some way. Um, but then my responsibility is to help find them an appropriate referral because it would be, while it's unethical to work with them if I can't maintain distance, it's also unethical for me to just abandon them, to be like, oh, I can't work with you anymore. You need to find a new therapist. So it's up to me to help them to find the appropriate referrals to get to the next therapist so that I'm balancing those things out. And maybe I continue to work with them until I get them to that therapist, but we avoid topics that where I wouldn't be able to do it, which would be less than ideal. I haven't had to do that, fortunately. But it's balancing those ethical requirements to not abandon the client and at the same time to make the therapy about them, not about the therapist. You have anything you got stuff to add, Gail?
No, I mean, I
I don't.
think, right, we have to end treatment for any number of reasons. Michael, you alluded to the person got better. So in
Mhm.
at that place, you're making a collaborative medical decision or therapeutic decision to end treatment, and we are all in agreement. Awesome. We took care of the thing. But when people still have active symptoms or are in need of ongoing treatment, then there's those scenarios, as Dan talked about, where we have a conflict of interest and we can't maintain that therapeutic distance, or, something is going on with the therapist in the room and they cannot provide that treatment. We have an obligation to be able to do that. But, there's also that reality of when you leave an organization, whether you retire or you are let go or you choose to leave of your own free will, you still have a responsibility to make a plan for those people that you're seeing so that, again, they can transition to care. What's not required, you have to make an appropriate referral and you can give them options. What's not required is they don't have to love the options you give them. That sometimes is the problem
Right.
too, is they say, well, you've given me 3 options of therapists. I don't like any of them. I want to see you. I'm sorry, I cannot be an option, and so
Right.
we're not forced into a situation where we have to then continue to be the option if it's problematic. And then, as you said, Dan, we also have an obligation to assess whether or not that thing that is maybe preventing us from seeing someone, if it's our own personal issue, something that's happened, does that require additional therapeutic work so that you can be a better, more psychologically healthy person. But also, I think as therapists, we're allowed to say, I just don't work with this. Let's say someone, a therapist has a parent who had unregulated bipolar disorder throughout their entire lives. And they say, you know what, as a therapist, I just don't want to be that therapist that works with either individuals who have bipolar disorder or be in a position to support their family. I may feel really good about the work I've done on my own upbringing, but it's going to bring stuff back. I don't know that I can be the best person to maintain that kind of distance. And so we're allowed to kind of carve those things out and say, I don't treat that. But that allows us to say that up front. Oh, hey, you're presenting with this thing. By the way, I have a conflict of interest, or I simply don't treat that. And you make that referral very quickly. Those referrals are easier than when we've established and something's happened or we've learned something new and then need to kind of pivot in the moment.
Yeah, and I've certainly done that with, I'm seeing someone for anxiety or depression, or I'm seeing someone for their sleep problems. They're doing really good work, and they come to me and they disclose down the road some significant severe trauma that is really impacting them. And I'm uncomfortable talking about this, but I want to share this with you. And I recognize that this person really needs a good systematized approach to deal with trauma, CPT or EMDR, something that I don't do. And I don't really work with I don't do that kind of work. I refer a lot of those folks to you, Gail. And if there's a conflict there, to someone else, but I can say to them, we've done great work on this. I don't do this work. And while I could potentially help you with your trauma issues, there's some specific work that is going to be better and going to help you more and give you a much greater probability of getting better. And we do this like medicine does this all the time. Primary care doctors, even specialists do this all the time. Like, oh, you know what? I don't treat this, but I know someone, like they're really great with this and they refer to Ken. She's terrific. You should see her instead of me. And this is fine to do in therapy too. And in fact, appropriate and recommended.
So also interesting, I think, in this conversation, because the segment is, would this work in therapy? And so the question was, can you do this? And I think, okay, fine. That's a good question. And we've talked it maybe even, beyond what it needed to be talked about. But there's also this interesting piece of it that while we were discussing it occurred to me, which is when someone presents with an issue and you say, gosh, I don't treat this. And maybe it's been sort of underlying and kind of maybe, even the reason why someone's maybe not getting better. It's sometimes really nice to be able to come back and say, hey, I think it's this thing that's kind of getting in our way. And I'd like to refer you to a specialist to do a certain kind of treatment. It lends this kind of weightiness to it. And I have found historically then being able to name it, to identify a treatment has been able to push someone at times therapeutically to take this perspective into account where maybe they were more dismissive of how this was impacting their functioning. So I do think not only are we obligated from the therapist end, from a treatment perspective, really having a careful, constructed, thoughtful conversation with someone can help them understand the gravity of maybe what they're experiencing or what may be underlying that for them,
Yeah.
and referring out is really appropriate. You know, sometimes borderline personality disorder is a great example of that, where we can have a very caring
Mm,
conversation about what this diagnosis means, what the treatment entails, and why you should do it this way.
right. And I have found that, I mean, a lot of therapists are sometimes have some anxiety about this, but I have found that for the most part, with a few exceptions, the most part of the clients I presented this to have felt respected by it.
Mhm.
Like, oh, he's not just going to keep working with me if he can't help me. He's referring me to someone who really knows their stuff. I like the work we've done. I'm kind of bummed about it.
Yeah.
But I can that makes total sense, and I appreciate seeing someone who is more highly skilled in this area. I think it's fine to say to someone, I don't have these skills. Again, our physician colleagues certainly say, I don't have the skill to do this procedure. I need to refer you to someone else. I see nothing wrong with me saying the same thing. I don't have the skill to work with this issue or to do the type of therapy needed. Let me refer you to a colleague who is terrific.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you for the real life application of this. And I'll say, like, actually, hearing you talk and what I remember of The Sopranos, which I watched less than 20 years ago, was they probably did a pretty good job of it, really, because she has her own therapist that she is seeing for issues. Because actually, earlier in the series, she suffers a sexual assault. And so there's a therapist she sees, and she talks through kind of like, I'm struggling because I know I can get immediate justice if I tell Tony about the sexual assault. And she
Mhm.
is really racked with guilt about that, because there is a desire for that. And
Mhm.
Tony tells her, like, you tell me who did this and it'll be done.
Yeah,
And
that's the scene I thought you were talking about because
right.
it's a really really delightful scene because you can see the anxiety in her face and the conflicting desires to like share this
Yeah.
information. Just even if she can't, it's funny because I remember it so different. I remember it as happening without him saying it out loud. I
Hmm.
remember her just sitting there with the knowledge and it not being said out loud. But maybe they did
Yeah.
give specific voice to it. But I do remember that and thinking, gosh, I don't, as a therapist, that might be, mm,
I'll throw this out, Michael. You can ultimately decide to keep this or not. It might seem unrealistic for a female therapist to know that her gangster mob affiliated client might have those, affectionate kinds of feelings enough about the therapist that take care of someone. The reality is, as a female therapist, I know that I have been cared for by clients enough that the implication has been there. Not that I have been tempted to ever to take advantage of that, but I can think of two instances where male clients have, just been like, no one better ever mistreat you.
mm,
And it's a little unsettling, right? Because you have a strong therapeutic rapport. This is about them, but they are feeling very protective, and it's an interesting dynamic in the therapy room. That's maybe a whole nother conversation, but it's not something we can always prevent. We do
yeah,
have to be careful about how we handle that. I think as a male therapist, you probably don't get that
I've
kind of
not had
level
that
of
happen.
feeling of
No,
protectiveness. But
no,
as
not
women
something
in
I've
the
experienced.
in the room, sometimes our male clients feel very protective of
Mm,
us, and so I think what Dr. Jennifer Melfi is that scene is portraying, I don't think is as unrealistic as
mhm.
we might think it is.
Yeah, yeah.
And the actual scene when she terminates um, therapy is several seasons later. Like, she wrestles with that for a long time, and then
Mhm.
she tells him, and you can see like he has an outburst of anger, and she
Mhm.
is terrified in that moment, but stands her ground, and he kind of seethes and she's saying like, I have a referral for you. And um anyway, but yeah, it's interesting, to kind of have this glimpse into kind of holding up the fiction, to the reality. So thanks for that. I appreciate it. We'll see what comes up next, and if we can keep doing segments from this where we have a shared familiarity with scenes. So I appreciate it.